She hemmed gowns for others, love stories, never realizing hers was just beginning. In the heart of Moonlight Row, tucked between a bustling bakery and a quiet bookstore, was a little shop named Stitches and Dreams. This was Alira's world. Sunlight, filtered through laced curtains, danced on spools of thread in every color imaginable. Glistening beads, soft silks, and bolts of velvet lined the walls. For years, Alira had poured her heart into creating masterpieces for others. Wedding gowns that whispered promises, ball gowns that shimmered with hope, and cocktail dresses that flirted with destiny. She was the town's fairy godmother, spinning threads of happiness for everyone but herself. Her clients would twirl in front of her antique mirror, their eyes sparkling. "It's perfect. Alira, you've captured my dream," they'd say. Alira would smile, a genuine, warm smile. But once the bell on the door jingled their departure, a familiar quiet would settle back into the room. She loved her work, truly, but her own dreams were neatly folded away, tucked in a drawer like old patterns she never found the time to use. Her own love story felt like a half-finished garment, waiting for a final stitch she didn't know how to make. She'd watch couples walk hand in hand down Moonlight Row, their laughter echoing in the twilight, and wonder if a love like that was just a fairy tale she helped dress up. One crisp autumn afternoon, the bell on her door chimed, not with the usual flutter of a bride-to-be, but with a firm, steady ring. A man stood there, silhouetted against the golden light. He wasn't looking for a gown. In his hands, he held a tattered, old leather-bound book. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the colorful chaos of her shop with a look of wonder. "I was told," he began, his voice a low, comforting hum, "that if anyone in this town could fix something precious, it would be the woman in this shop." He wasn't mistaken, but it wasn't a torn seam he was pointing to. He carefully placed the book on her counter. It was a vintage travel journal, its spine broken, its pages threatening to escape. His name was Julian, a historian and writer who had come to Moonlight Row to trace his family's roots. The journal belonged to his great-grandmother, a woman who, a century ago, had lived right here on this very street. He spoke of her adventures, her dreams, and her own lost love story, hidden within the faded ink of the journal's pages. As Alira gently examined the delicate book, she felt a strange connection, a thread pulling her not to a fabric, but to a story. She had mended countless dresses, but never a book. Still, she couldn't say no. "I'll do my best," she promised, her fingers tracing the embossed title, The Wanderer's Heart. Over the next few weeks, Julian became a regular visitor. He'd bring her coffee from the bakery next door and sit quietly, watching her work her magic. Alira, using fine threads and archival glue, painstakingly rebound the journal. She treated each page like delicate lace, each word a precious bead, and as she mended the book, Julian told her stories from within it. He read aloud passages of his great-grandmother's journey, of her longing for an artist she loved, whose studio was rumored to have been right where Alira's shop now stood. A strange feeling of déjà vu washed over Alira. She felt as though she were stitching together not just a book, but the fabric of time itself. They talked for hours. Alira spoke of her own quiet life, of the joy she found in her craft, and the loneliness that sometimes crept in after the last customer left. Julian talked about his travels, his search for connection to a past he'd never known, and his own feeling of being a wanderer, just like his great-grandmother. He saw past the skilled dressmaker. He saw the artist, the dreamer who had put her own hopes on hold. He didn't see her as a fairy godmother for others, but as a woman with her own story waiting to be told. In his eyes, she wasn't just a part of the scenery of Moonlight Row. She was its heart. One evening, as Alira was adding the final stitch to the book's new leather cover, Julianne pointed to a faded sketch on one of the last pages. It was a design for a dress, simple but elegant, with tiny, embroidered stars along the hem. His great-grandmother had written beside it, "A gown for a hopeful heart." Alira's breath caught in her throat. The design was eerily similar to a sketch she had made years ago. A personal project she'd never started, a dress she had called her someday dress. It was a design born from her own hopeful heart. The coincidence was too magical to ignore, a thread of destiny woven through a century. Julian looked from the sketch to Alira, a slow smile spreading across his face. It seems my great-grandmother left behind more than just a journal. A sighed softly. She left a pattern. That night, after Julian left, Elara didn't put her dreams back in the drawer. She pulled out a bolt of deep midnight blue silk, the color of the sky just after sunset. She found her box of silver thread, the one that shimmered like starlight. For the first time in a long, long time, she wasn't making a dress for a client. She was making a dress for herself. She wasn't just stitching fabric. She was stitching her own story, her own hope, into being. The following week, Moonlight Row was hosting its annual autumn ball. In the past, Elara had always been too busy finishing gowns for everyone else to even consider going. She would stand at her shop window, watching the couples waltz under the fairy lights, a bittersweet smile on her face. But this year was different. When Julian came to pick up the finished journal, he found Elara standing before the antique mirror. She was wearing the midnight blue gown. The silver stars along the hem twinkled, catching the light as she moved. She looked, for the first time, like the heroine of her own story. Julian was speechless. The journal was in his hands, its story now preserved, but a new one was unfolding right before his eyes. He held out his hand. "My great-grandmother wrote that she never got to wear her dress," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "She wrote that she hoped someday a woman with a hopeful heart would dance in it for her." Elara took his hand, her fingers fitting perfectly in his. As they stepped out of the shop and into the magic of Moonlight Row, the quiet little dressmaker was gone. In her place was a woman who finally understood that her own love story was not a fairy tale. She dressed up for others. It was real, it was hers, and it was just beginning.